What's up, guys? Grant here, Watercross racer, 777s. Today, just kind of explaining the general big things between a watercross sled and a snow sled. Right here, I got a 21 Chaos, and this is a 20 RMK, both axis chassis, virtually the same snowmobile for the most part. But just kind of elaborating on some of the big details and what goes into a watercross sled compared to a snow sled. Now, looking at the front, the obvious thing is that you can see that there's massive skis on this Chaos that's over here compared to the little tiny C&A minis that we do run on this mod sled that I've got over here. The reason for the mini skis is it kind of helps you in the corner that you don't have ski drag. Some people like that, some people don't. It's kind of a personal preference. They do stuff overseas a little bit differently for their series. But generally what I like to run is these C&A minis. They work great, they look great. And, you know, the skis really don't do a whole lot for you on the water, but they do help. Now, looking at the front ends, you can see we're running something that's very narrowed on this orange sled over here compared to the Chaos. Now, this is a 30-inch front end. We also are running a lot smaller shock. We also mess around with spindles to get that natural rake of the sled. Because kind of how the science works of this is the snowmobile is a hydroplaning tire. So the track speed of it spinning so fast allows it to propel on top of the water. And that kind of gets me back to my next point here. Now, looking at the rear of the snowmobiles, you got the Chaos over here with this massive lug track, and then I actually have a lot smaller track lug-wise on this orange sled. Now, looking at the lug, generally like to run kind of an 1.25 to 1.5 inches is what I've found works really well. And we're still no experts. We're still learning as we go. It's been just a few years in watercross now. But with the smaller lug, you can actually get the track to spin really good. Versus kind of the myth, of having a deeper lug is actually going to grab too much water for you when you're out on the water ripping. Another thing too, visually just looking at between the two of these things, is this skid is a little bit shorter so that you have water displacement inside of the tunnel. Now, this is a 146 skid in a 155 tunnel compared to, a 155 skid in a 155 tunnel. And you can visually see that this skid is brought in quite a bit. Now, looking at the rears of the snowmobiles, you can see there's a drastic change snow flap to snow flap. On the Chaos, you have, a vented stock Polaris flap. On my RMK over here, running, 90s Polaris rubber flaps. They seem to work really, really well. And all of your steering is done from leaning the snowmobile over, and the rear flap acts like a rudder. So this is going to dig into the corner when you're turning, and in the IWA we turn right for our ovals. We do left now too in Le Mans, but for the most part this sled is made to turn right. This is going to dip super hard in the corner and then release in the straightaway, so you can go as fast as possible in the straightaway. Then looking at the skids too in the rear, you can see there is kind of a natural rake to this orange sled over here compared to the Chaos. That's because you want the sled to naturally wheelie on the water, and that's also going to help you skip a lot longer and have more success in that. Another thing, looking at our suspension, you're going to want a really stiff front skid shock. Usually the stock shocks will work, but you're going to want to swap out a spring, change valving, do whatever your needs, for weight-wise and what you would prefer. Then looking at our running boards, you can see we have block-off plates installed on this orange sled. That's to keep water out from spraying up at you compared to the Chaos over here. We do run crank drains in our engines too as well, so that's to get water out of the cylinder when you do go down and sink. And then also got our gas tanks, which are obviously very different. Got my Moonlight Fab Axis chassis gas tanks over here compared to a stock one. Now, the stock one is nice for fuel capacity, but if you do go down, a lot of water can get trapped inside of these stock tanks. So that's why I do like to run, the aftermarket tanks on the watercross sleds. Helps you get that water out a lot faster, and you can also run a little bit less fuel, save a little bit of weight. As the handlebars go, it's kind of rider preference to get it in that position that you like or what's comfortable for you. This is just a setup that I like. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, so this works great for me. And then in the front of it, rocking a buoy. So when the sled does sink, in the water, it will happen to you eventually. It happens to everybody. We are running ATV winch cable This synthetic rope works really well, just with a little buoy on top of it. And that helps you retrieve your snowmobile when it goes down. Pretty standard on all of these to run a tether. As long as you kill the engine before you go down, usually you're okay. You know, water can't be compressed very well, so you run into issues when you're trying to compress water under a load. Coming up to the front of the snowmobile, you can see that I do have some frog skins up here compared to the Chaos. That's to try and keep water out, but also getting cool air inside of there from a cooling standpoint. You can see we do have a couple little block-off plates on the exhaust as well. That helps you in the corner so you don't get water surging up to the actual exhaust when you're turning. For the most part, you know, you could pretty much ride one of these out of the box, which is a small little tweaks, you know, track change, a few other things in the suspension, and ride your sled year-round. Ride it out west, you know, have all the snow stuff for that, and then convert it and race watercross all summer long. And what's funny is here in Minnesota, we don't get as much snow that's capable for these guys, so I get to ride my mountain sled more in the summer than even the winter. So we've talked about suspension, we've talked about gas tanks, we've talked about the front end with the skis and everything, the natural rake of the snowmobile. Now keeping the water out of the sled is also the big factor with the block-off plates. We actually seal the entire chassis, all the nooks and crannies everywhere. A good way to do it is kind of turn the lights off, shine a flashlight through the snowmobile. I found that using this liquid nails Fuse-It has been the best sealant. Holds up over time. I've got a few sleds that are about 3 years old that have been watercross sleds the whole time, and this stuff has held up great. I know you can get it at Lowe's, Menards, sometimes on Amazon too, but this Fuse-It works awesome. Another thing with that sealant, you also use the infamous Zips tape anywhere in the snowmobile. Trying to do a quick fix or something to prevent water from getting in there, because if you do get water inside of the engine bay of the snowmobile while you're riding it out on the water and that drive belt gets wet, you're gonna sink. So keeping that belt dry for as long as you can is gonna keep you skipping for as long as you can. Another cool thing that I do add on a lot of my sleds is I do have a waterproof light that does illuminate when the sled goes down in the water. Just kind of helps for finding the snowmobile in the case that you do lose it. And it also does help. Sometimes we do race in spots where we do need a diver, so that light blinking underwater might be the ticket to finding your snowmobile. And for the most part, the electronics on the snowmobile seem to hold up great for this Axis chassis. I know we've had issues with other chassis in the past, but you know, this sled's probably been underwater, you know, maybe 10 times, and everything is still functioning great, working awesome. Like I said before, as long as you get this thing killed before you go down, you got those crank trains in there to get the water out of the cylinders. You're gonna change your gas, change your oil, change your spark plugs, and then the big thing on the 850s is the EGT sensors. So you gotta change all that stuff out and have her fired back up and go back out on the water. I know this is just kind of a brief summary. I love talking about this stuff all day long. If anybody has any questions, because I was once in your shoes too, where you know no one would give me any info as to how this stuff even works, and it's kind of trial by error. Reach out to me on any of my social medias, you know, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, at Mr. Snowmax on Instagram, Grant Whitaker on Facebook, and then Snowmax Performance on YouTube. I would love to answer any questions. If you have any questions just about how racing in that IWA series works, or how these snowmobiles can go from snow to water, or how that even works, and maybe we can even do a more in-depth video on something you have a question for. I also have some more budget-built watercross sleds compared to kind of a pro-level build snowmobile that we can show in another video too. You know, you could build a watercross sled for $2 to $3 grand that, you know, would be successful racing. Versus something like this, you know, that you're going to have a lot more money into. But thanks for watching, and keep on riding.